But let's listen back through to it again. Hi guys, welcome back to a new tutorial. I'm SKETI. This time we're going to look at how to make complex chords, but quite easily, just using basic music theory, but in a simpler way instead of talking about the circle of fifths and fourths and so on and so forth. So if you're brand new to music theory, hopefully this will help you. Anyway, let's get to it. So the two scales I'm going to focus on today is C major and A minor, and then how to make some interesting chord sequences and chords bigger than just triads. So just a few things just to explain before I talk about that. So a major scale, obviously we know is historically like the happier sounding scale, and then the minor scale is more the sort of sadder, moodier kind of scale. And then a triad, just to sort of finish that explanation, is three notes together to make a chord. So we can have a major triad or a minor triad or other types of triad like diminished or augmented, but we're just going to focus on major and minor triads today. So let's start with the scale of C major, which is the reason why we tend to mainly start with this is it's all of the white notes, so we don't have to think about any of the black notes that get into sharps and flats. So there we go, and that's all of the notes in C major: C, D, E, F, G, A, B and C. Now that would be useful to write this down if it's the kind of thing you'd forget if you're going to go for writing in a major scale, and I'm just going to double this in length just so we've got the full bar's worth. Now, the relative minor of the scale, you might hear this used a lot, is a major scale. You take the sixth note of that major scale, so in this case it's A, and then that is the minor scale relative to C major. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start at A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. And as you can see, it's all of the same notes, but all we've done is we've started from a different point. So C major started on C and A minor started on A, but it's still the exact same notes: A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A and C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. So the same notes, just from a different starting point. Now for this I'm going to focus on just the minor scale today, because we're going to write a chord sequence in a minor scale, or specifically A minor, not a minor scale. Right. So A minor, and I'm going to stretch this out to twice the length now so we can start drawing some chords. Now here's a cool thing to remember for minor scales. Actually I'll explain through major scales to start with, just to make things a little bit awkward. So C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Now this is a cool thing to remember, and what I'll do is as I'm explaining this, I'll put this up in writing on ScreenFlow as I'm explaining it along, so when this tutorial gets uploaded you'll see what I'm talking about. So a major scale usually starts with, just so I can remind myself, is the first note would be a major chord in that scale, the second note would be a minor chord, third note would be a minor chord, fourth note a major chord, fifth note a major chord, sixth note a minor chord, the seventh note is a diminished chord, but we can actually make that minor. It doesn't really matter, it depends on what you're trying to achieve, but we can usually make that minor if you want to use a seventh chord. And then obviously back to the root note, which is a C, which is a major chord again. And then for the minor, so A minor, so that's minor, diminished or minor, obviously depending. So if you look at the major scale, it's the seventh note that's either diminished or minor when you turn it into a chord, or in the minor scale it's the second note which is either diminished or minor. And then we've got C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major and A minor. So if we were to move all of these down to say G minor, it's still the same. So G minor, A diminished, B flat major, C major, D minor, E flat minor, F major, and then that should be G minor. Yeah, I think that's right, yeah. So basically all we're doing is we're moving the root note like so. I'll just go back to A minor again, just because we're using the white notes, it's a lot easier to look at. And as a starting point, because if you like what you've done with these chords and you think, right, I want to write this in the scale of F minor, you just grab all the chords and then move them down to F from the starting point. So like say these were all chords, I can just go and now I'm in F minor instead of A minor. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to complete the chords so we can go through and see what each chord is. Now for a minor chord, think a gap of 2 and then a gap of 3. So in this case, A, so there's a gap of 2 notes and then a gap of 3 notes. So that's always what a minor chord looks like. It's always 2 notes between the third and then 3 notes between the fifth. So that's a flattened third because it's minor. But now if I go to a major chord, so we've got a spacing of 3 and then a spacing of 2. So that's a major third. So 1, 3, 5, 1, flat 3, 5. And if I put these two together, if I draw them, say it was a C minor and then a C major, you can see where the difference is 2, 3, and then 2, 3, sorry, 2, 3, and then 3, 2. Simple as that, really. So I'll just drag this back. So always remember, I can delete that as well, that your minor is always a spacing of 2, then 3, from 1 to 3 to 5, and then a spacing for the major chord of 3, then 2. So now I can just sort of start completing these, and a good reference as well is, especially because we're just working with the white notes, is there shouldn't be any black notes used. If you've drawn this in, there's a black note, then you've got an issue, except for this chord here, but we'll get to that in a minute. Again, 2 and then a 3, so that's a minor chord. 3, then a 2, because if we try to make it 2 then 3, we've got a black note, which we can't have in this scale because it's all white notes. 3 then 2, that's a major chord. 3 then 2, another major chord, and then back to the root, 2 and then 3. There we go. Now this chord here, I'm just going to focus on for a second. So we've got a 2, and then really what we should have to make it minor is a spacing of 3, so that'd be 1, 2, 3. So there's your 3 spacing, but unfortunately now we've got that black note which isn't in the scale of A minor or C major. So that's actually what the chord is, but if we listen to the notes together, actually if I just play it from the start, let's play that over here so we can hear it. This note feels a little bit out of place, but if we move it up to there, now it sounds a lot more like a minor chord. Now this is why I say that in a major scale the 7th note, or in a minor scale the 2nd note, you can either have it as a diminished or a minor depending on what you're trying to achieve. Now I tend to always go for it being a minor chord just because it makes things easier, because I tend not to use diminished chords very often, unless you're doing stuff like jazz or swing or blues or things like that where you're getting into more interesting types of chords. Then yeah, that's when you start to be using the diminished, which in this case it would be B, D, then F rather than the F sharp. Now what we can also do is start to make these chords a lot more interesting as well, where we can turn them into 7th or 9th and 11th chords and so on and so forth. And a really cool way to do this is, again, just remembering that we're looking at the white notes only, is if we start with this A minor chord, we've got a spacing of 2, then a spacing of 3, then if we just follow the sort of logic behind that, we have a spacing of 2. So now this is an A minor 7 chord, 2, 3, 2. We can then make it an A minor 9th chord by having a spacing of 3 after that. So 2, 3, 2, 3. Like so. And then we could make an 11th chord again by another spacing of 2. Like so. So 2, 3, 2, 3, 2. So we can start to get into more intricate and interesting sounding chords. Now that doesn't always work, so if we go to the C major, let's see if it does the same thing. So 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, yep, so there we've got the major 7th, and then the major 9th, and then the major 11th, because 3, 2, 3, 2, now we've got a 2 here, so that 11th is actually flat, because that actually should be there, which it isn't. So this is where, if we're going to follow the white notes, and there's another chord that this happens with as well, which is the G major here. So if I was going to try and make that major 7th, we've got the F sharp, which is a black note. So we've got a 3, a 2, and a 2, and that's known as what's known as this dominant 7th, where it's 3, 2, 2. So if you remember this, if you want a minor 7th, it's 2, 3, 2. If you want a major 7, it's 3, 2, 3. And if you want a dominant 7, it's a 3, 2, 2. So that's the numbers to remember, and I'll put them on the screen as well. I'll just put that as a cue point for me to remind myself to put that on the screen. And again, we could complete these chords out, so D, F, A. Let's see what kind of 7th chord this is going to be. So that's 2, 3, 2. Yeah, it's a white note, so that's a minor 7, a minor 9, a minor 11, and then the E, so B, like so. Would that be right? 2, 3, 2, 2, 3. So yeah, that 9th there isn't in the right place. It should actually be there. But for this purpose, it works. Because if we play all of these back, except for this chord, which actually, yeah, let's have a look at that. So 2, 3, 2. Yeah, it's going to be another 2, because otherwise it'd be on the C sharp. So some of these chords do start to sound a little bit interesting and strange as well. So obviously these have to be used to taste. It's not like, okay, we're just going to write an entire chord sequence with just 11th chords, because that might not work, because we can get into different types of chords, just obviously if we're going to try and make this chord sequence sound as good as possible. So anyway, now that I've focused on that, what I'm going to do is actually focus on making a chord sequence. So these are the notes that we're going to use. We're going to start in A minor, which again is all the white notes. So what I've got here is I've got the first chord, and then we've got, if we count up, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So then the 6th chord in the minor scale, so A minor, then that would be F major, and then we've got the D, which is A, 2, 3, the 4th note in the scale, so that's going to be D minor, and then we've got G, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there's a G, so that's the 7th chord in the scale. So these are just the root notes for now, so if we listen to it against a drum beat. Cool, and I'm just going to bring that down an octave so it sort of stays in the same range, because this is something I'm going to move into a little bit more, how to create more unique sounding chords, but they're still the same, it's just we've moved some of the notes up or down an octave. So I'm just going to duplicate that up and draw the chords from this point. So first things first, now here's a really cool thing that you can do, is if you know the 5th note of your chord, so in this case A would be, if we count up to 2, yeah, and then 3, because it's a minor chord. So this E is my 5th note. Now that I know that, I can highlight all of the notes just to make this chord super fast. And just by holding Option down on a Mac, or I think it's Control on Windows, and just copy that up to the E, is we have the natural, or the perfect 5th as it's known in music theory terms, for every single chord. So E for A minor, C for F major, A for D minor, and D for G major. And now all I have to do is fill in the 3rd notes. So that would be this one here, so 2, 3 because it's a minor chord, 3, 2 because it's a major chord, 2, 3 because it's a minor chord, and then again 3, 2 because it's a major chord. Now we can listen to the back. Now if you're wondering, okay, why did I pick those numbers specifically? In this case I just started with the first note of the scale, which was A, because we were writing in A minor. And then after that it's basically pick a number. So I decided, right, let's see what happens when I go to the 6th note in the scale. So A, and then the 6th note. That seemed to sort of work as a progression. And then after that it's like, okay, well, what note would work next? And all this is a little bit of trial and error. The more you practice this, the more you start to realise what works best. But then I found the 4th note worked. And then I was thinking, okay, how can I finish this chord sequence off with a different chord? And I thought, well, let's see if the 7th works. And then all I did was just transpose these down an octave, so it was, instead of going up like that, it's like this. They're exactly the same notes, it's just those 3 that aren't the A transposed down an octave rather than being above the original A note. Now if we go back to how I made some interesting chords before, we can actually start to make these a little bit more interesting. So Let's get the E. And so if we think 2, 3, yeah, and then 2, and then a spacing of 3. We've got the F chord, so that's 3, 2, 3, 2. We've got a D minor chord, so that's 2, 3, 2, 3. So I'm just making ninth chords all the way through this. Now I might find that these ninth chords don't work for every single chord, so I might actually delete a few notes and see how it works. And 3, 2. This was the dominant seventh that I found because I couldn't go up with spacing of 3, and then 3 there, so that's 3, 2, 2, 3. So let's listen back to this now. This might be a little bit overkill, but it's always trial and error to see what works best. Don't think when you're making chord sequences like, okay, you followed this and that's it, perfect chord sequences for the rest of your life. It's always trial and error. Even now I'm still learning new ways of doing chord sequences, using substitute chords and so on and so forth. It's one of those never-ending journeys of learning, basically. I know that sounds cheesy, but that's how music is. So this one here I'm not liking the sound of too much, but what we could do to make it sound a little bit better is looking at transformations, where we basically grab a note and either move it up or down an octave. And the way you do that is you hold your shift key down, I think that's on both Mac and Windows, and then use the up and down arrow keys. So let's see what this sounds like for the first chord. So I don't think that ninth works in the first chord, so let's just get rid of that. But let's see what the G looks like. That's quite cool. This G here I'm going to move down an octave as well. Yeah, those two chords really work well together now, because you can see it's pretty much exactly the same notes except the introduction of the F there, and obviously in the root note you've got the A and the F as well, just to make sure it sounds like an A minor, then an F major, sorry. Now the next one, I'm thinking, oh, we're starting to get a little bit too low here. Well, how about we grab hold of this D, which technically is the root note of D minor, but what if we bunch it up an octave? Now listen to all of that together. Yeah, and that works really nicely. And then let's see, for this one, let's bring this A down. So that's now technically like, if we took the third out, a suspended second if you look into music theory more. But that's still the ninth, but all I've done is brought it down an octave. So it was that F that was standing out there that I could hear. If we just play that back again. Yeah, you can hear that F standing out. So if we bring that down an octave, let's see what it sounds like. Yeah, so for now that F is still standing out. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep the G, the A, the B and the D. If we took the A out, that's still G major, but that A, with it being a ninth, I can now bring it down to the second in the G chord, if you like. Yep. So instead of it being all the way up here, which it would stand out too much because it's like a lot of notes away from the highest, which is the perfect fifth here, the D. Yeah, it just sounds out of place, but if we bring it down here and listen to it instead. Try that again, I accidentally pressed the space bar. Yeah, that works a lot better. Now what you could do is just as a trial and error, remembering that we're using the white notes all the time, so let's see if this D, if we copy it to the E as well, let's see how that works in this chord. And I might try and do it instead in place of the A, so that A is not playing anymore. So yeah, let's play the whole chord sequence through and see what that sounds like. Yeah, it does stand out a little bit too much, but again, this is just trial and error, just trying to find out what works. So I think I'm just going to keep with that chord for now. So yeah, that's one chord sequence that I've tried there. Now another cool thing you can do, and this is both in minor and major scales, is if you start your chord sequence not on the first note but on the 6th note instead. Because what you tend to find happens, so this is still in A minor, but I've started on the F, which is the 6th note in that A minor scale, is you can end up getting sort of like infinitely repeating, well, infinitely, yeah, it sounds like it's infinitely repeating the chord sequence. So it's never resolving back to the original A note, which is in the A minor scale. It feels like it can just go on forever and it would never get boring, and you could just obviously put a melody line over the top of that and it would just keep going. And this is a really useful technique to use, so to stop your chords from sounding, chord sequences from sounding too still. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play that back. So these are just the root notes. Yeah, I'm just going to loop around that as well, just to show what I mean. Yeah. And now, so the first chord that I had here is a, if I just get rid of some of the other notes that are not needed, so we have an F major, so that's F, A and C with a spacing of 3 and then 2. And then these two notes, if I just highlight them both and put them up an octave, you can see you had 3, 2, 3, 2. So that's a pattern that we were following. But all I did was I grabbed these and I moved them down. And that actually sounds like Clair de Lune. One of my favourite pieces of classical music. So this chord now is an F major 9. Yeah, because it's got the E and the G. And the next chord to go along with it, as you can see, is very similar, but all it has is the D in there instead to make that D minor chord. And then for the second time around, instead of having the D below, I moved that D an octave up, and also removed the E note because I found it was just a little bit too much. So let's listen to those two chords together. And again, I'm not using any new techniques here. This is all what I've just explained previously. Just obviously I built these chords first and then moved the notes around using that transformation up and down an octave with each note. Then we've got the A minor which has a G and a B in it, so that would be A minor 9. If we listen to that now. And then we have, it starts with a G, so G, B, D, E, so that this is a G6 chord, because it's got the E in there. And then the last chord, which if we just look at it, so we've got E, G, A, B and D, and it's got a root note of E, so yeah, E, G and B, so that's E minor. And then the A would be, so yeah, that's the 4th note in that chord, and then the D, which is the minor 7. So this here is just an extra note to see. This was just another trial and error as I was playing around before, just sticking a note in, see if it sounded good. And that works quite well because that A, introducing the back in, obviously if we look back at the F minor chord here, we've got the A note, and if you look as well, we've got an A in the D, the F major chord, an A, the D minor chord, I've got an A, the G, using that second, which is also the 9th, I've got an A there as well. The only chord that doesn't is this G chord here, which we could actually reintroduce it, but it means there's an A in every single chord. Although having said that, if we look down, we've got a G in every single chord. So it's really good to start grouping these notes together, so it's like the chords aren't jumping all over the place. And also, if you think of it from a practical point of view, if you're a piano player or a keyboard player, you want to keep your hands in a position where it's easy to get to each chord instead of having to jump up and down massive amounts of notes or octaves trying to play those different chords. Now obviously that depends on the kind of music that might be required if it's part of what you're trying to play. Now, just to finish off this tutorial is just to show you how far you can actually take this. And again, this is an A minor or C major, depending on how you look at this, because it could technically be, because if we think about it, A is the 6th note of C major scale. So this could actually be in C major or in A minor, using it as the root note. And this is what we made. So this is sort of like a little bit of future bass with that sort of kawaii kind of sound to it. So what we have here is we've got the A minor chord and using that root note, and then it goes to the B, but instead of it being B diminished, I've introduced the F sharp as I talked about previously, instead to make it into a minor chord instead of a diminished chord. And then we've got C major 6 because the A has been introduced. And then we have that technically also, if you look at C major 6, if you rearrange the notes, so if I put, say, this A down an octave, we've now got A, C, E, G. That is also A minor 7. So if you think, C6 and A minor 7 are technically the same chord, just depending on where you put the notes. But you know it's C major 6 because the root note is C. And then we've got D, A, C, E, G and B. So I'm thinking that's going to be, because there's no F note, I don't think it's D minor. We've got D, A, C, E, G. I think this is C major but with a D underneath it, because one thing you can do with chords is you can put the second, or I think it's the second or the fourth note in the root, and that creates a more interesting colourful chord as well. So, and then we've got E, B, D, F, G and A, and if we think about B minor, E would be the fourth note, so yeah, that's another B minor chord. And then we've got A, so that's A, C, D, E, G, A. And I would say, yeah, that's going back to the roots. But let's listen back through to it again. That could be... It is some form of A chord. But again, like we had the C major 6, which could also be the A minor 7. Yeah, we can have some interesting and unique chords. And again, if we look through this, the only note that shouldn't be in the scale, but because it's the B minor instead of it being B diminished, is F sharp. That's the only rule I've broken, but again I explained why. Instead of having that sort of flattened fifth, so it's B, D, F, B, D, F sharp does sound nicer and can often fit in this the chord sequence that you're making, depending on what it is you're trying to achieve. Anyway guys, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Again, any questions that you've got about this, because obviously music theory is the one thing that people do find a little bit tricky, but with all of the stuff that I've written down and I've put on the screen, please pause at points so you can go through, even copy these chord sequences as well, just so you can get them in your head and see how they're working, so you can then move further, because all of this really is about trial and error and taking it in the direction that you want to and learning with those steps that we've gone through here. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this. Leave a comment below if you've got any questions or any recommendations for future tutorials. Please share, subscribe, like, hit that notification bell so you see these videos. I'll see you next time, guys. Bye. Hi guys, SKETI here. Do you want to learn how to... Or how about... Or maybe even... Well, I'm now giving online one-to-one tuition. The lessons will be entirely centered around what you want to learn. We can cover such things as making drums, bass,
sound design, sidechaining, mixing, composition, music theory, mastering,
and much, much more. Maybe you just want to brush up on your production skills using Ableton Live or Logic, or whatever it is you want to learn. Get in touch on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube to find out more information. Bonus round. Every new student will get a free sample pack of their choice from my Exit Sounds sample label. So if this sounds good to you, and you want your tunes to sound less like, and more like, then get in touch to find out prices and book your first lesson now. See you soon.
Everybody jump up, come on!